right. Hello, everybody. Hope you guys are having a good ECGC so far, and thank you for coming to our session. Sorry, is that too loud? I'll be right here. But yeah, so we'll go ahead and introduce ourselves. My name is Matt Merino.
And I'm Travis Brown. My focus area in game design, we're both seniors at William Peace University getting Bachelor of Arts in Simulation and Game Design. My focus area is 3D modeling and user interface design.
And my focus area is level design and sound design. So we're going to first just say, yeah, we have a great photo of our group right here to help us in the fall semester of 2021 on this game that we're going to show you guys called Remembering Hue. So those people include Abigail Wells, which is here in the front row. Say hi to Abby. And we had Kristen Brown, which is also here in the front row. We had Billy Gay, which is not here, unfortunately. Kiana Askew, and Christian West. And they're all integral to the production of this project. And then me and Travis, this spring semester of 2022, added to the project. So that's what we're going to be showing you guys, everything we did last semester and what we've done this semester as well.
So bear with me with this novel, but here we go. Remembering Hue is a third-person level-based exploration game in which the player must interact with the environment by collecting and mixing colors in order to help Paint Girl, our main character, traverse her way through grief. Every level represents its own part of the process, beginning with no visible color due to Paint Girl's loss of fulfillment in her painting. This loss of fulfillment is caused by Greevils, dark creatures who linger and sap color from the world solely to remind Paint Girl of her negative feelings. Avoid them and spread hope and color throughout the world.
All right, so our target demographic for Remembering Hue was, well, we were going for a rated E for everyone rating. So we were thinking specifically in kind of the 9 to 12-year-old range. And this game is meant for casual play. So for a kid, it might be more challenging, but we were also trying to have it be, challenging in some ways for adults as well. So we did want it to be, I guess, appealing to multiple markets, but we're obviously focusing mainly on the 9 to 12-year-old demographic. And then the story element and the symbolic environments, especially with our theme of grief, that does appeal more to the kind of adult audience. So we wanted kind of a mix there.
This is our trailer and gameplay for this game. So when it comes to mechanics and functionality, there are two main mechanics. There's active painting and passive painting. Active painting is what you saw with those jump pads, launch pads. They follow the 6 main colors of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. And the character has to select a color and paint the corresponding object: the red jump pad, the orange movable crate, the yellow catapult, the green bridge, the blue puddle, and the purple door. The passive coloring also has to do with the color of the character selected, and it paints the environment around Pink Girl as she walks around.
Alright, so to go over kind of the stages of production we went through as a team, we started out with conceptualization, which was essentially just brainstorming. So the whole group just kind of threw out random ideas. There was no right or wrong. It was just putting out ideas to see what we could come up with. We had some ideas such as like a rhythm shooter, an FPS game, but we ended up settling on an exploration game that had puzzle elements. We wanted it from the get-go to be something that was kind of like accessible for a large audience. So that's what we ended up doing in the conceptualization phase. And then we also went into the prototyping phase and the concept art phase after that, which was visualization mainly. So with concept art, obviously, a lot of visualization will happen, and that's where you can kind of refine those ideas and chisel away at, you kind of start to get a better idea of like what it actually is tangibly. And then with the alpha version, we started to add just basic assets and art into it, and also got basic mechanics into the game as well. And then in the beta version, we just kind of started finalizing those art pieces, and then by the master version, we just refined those and polished those as much as we can, or could.
So about iterations, the iterative game process is a cyclical process of coming up with ideas, testing those ideas, and taking it back to the drawing board. So as you can see on our left-hand side up here, we have a before picture of the same scene on the right, and this is from our main level. It's the main street as you come out into the world. And essentially this process follows the idea that a perfect idea is impossible in the first try. So don't hold on to that.
So we're going to go a little bit deeper into the conceptualization phase for us. So again, conceptualization, like I said earlier, is essentially just getting an idea of the different options you have, and then kind of centering in on those, or the options that you want to pursue most. Next slide here. Actually, I'll go a little bit more over that. So yeah, in terms of like genre, again, we wanted like an exploration type of genre, but we started to think about like what are some like inspirational games that we look at that could inspire us to in what we want to do in this game. And so like Journey, for example, was one really big game that we looked at in the conceptualization phase. Epic Mickey as well. You guys probably have seen some resemblance with the paintbrush there. And we looked at a bunch of different games to kind of get inspiration during this phase. So I would recommend, like, whenever you guys are brainstorming your games, do not be afraid to look at other source material. If anything, I think that's a required part of this conceptualization phase. Is get inspired by other people's work. So we did that for sure, and then we started to kind of go on our own path after we got that kind of springboarding point at the beginning.
Another novel, please excuse me. But our story was a collection of ideas that we all came up with at the beginning. And I sort of took those and brought them into one whole piece. And it essentially follows the main conflict of the story, which is Paint Girl's battle with grief over the loss of her mentor, Hue, sort of creating a double meaning with the title, Remembering Hue. But with the grief came the grievals, and they're the physical embodiment of that grief. And they began leaching color from the world, again, like I said before. And it ties all back into the Paint Girl's main objective, which is to rid the grievals, purify the shrines, and bring color back. The concept for the story, again, began rather early, considering this is the conceptualization phase. It remained largely unchanged, but we did start to implement certain storytelling devices in terms of collectible levels in the game, and you'll learn more about that later.
Okay, so as you can see here, we had some of our great artists do some concept art at the very beginning of this project. So on the left we have concept art by Abby, where she kind of did a take on the smock idea we had. We had the smock idea, the right one as well, but she also kind of incorporated some of like these paint stains onto the smock as well. The pigtails were a big one for us. We thought that was just like adorable, and we were like, we want a like really cute vibe with this game. So that definitely fell into place very well there. On the right side, you can see Kristen kind of incorporated the element of like having paint on the end of the pigtails as kind of like akin to like a paintbrush and how that would have paint at the end of it. So we really liked that idea, and that was kind of what we ended up going with.
Going further into concept art and visualization, we have a few different areas here to cover. On the left-hand side, we have some UI. In that image, you can see in the top left and bottom left corners, you can see prototypes for the color mixing and the UI bar that shows how much paint you've collected. Over on the right-hand side, on the top, you can see a prototype for the concept art for the shrine. The left-hand side of that image is covered in ink by the Greevils, and the purified one on the right is something that Paint Girl has to achieve. Towards the bottom there, you can see our environmental assets created by Kiana. You can see our revival fountain, trash can, mailbox, some foliage, stuff like that.
Okay, so now we're going to get into the alpha version of Remembering Hue. So with the alpha version, basically what it is bringing in core models to the game, core assets that are big assets. So for us on the right there, you can see there's building models built by Kiana, and we wanted those to be like modular. So we knew that was going to take a lot of time to refine, and we started that early on in this alpha version. And then again, also like I mentioned earlier, we tried to get like the basics of the mechanics in. So we had like red jump pad, orange crate, and you guys will see that in a second in the gameplay. But yeah, so that's the basics of what the alpha version was supposed to be. We're going to pull the gameplay.
You might want to mute that because I think I'm talking.
Yeah. We were thinking about that. All right. So as you can see, she's just kind of floating around, but that is the state of an alpha version. Obviously, you'll not have everything fully in. So, but without the character animations, it was basically more so, like I was saying, focusing on getting assets in and getting basic functionality. So you can see here that she just switched to red. So at the very least, we had some basic color changing in the game. This is also just like kind of a prototype level. So it's just for a developer's perspective. This wasn't used in the final game. And we had some passive coloring as well in the game, as you can see there.
Those little orbs you see floating around, those are the color pickups. That's how you get paint. And you'll see as she collects them, the UI in the top left fills up. The color menu also has the color mixing, which should be shown here in a second. There we are. And as you can see, as the colors mixed, the orange pickups appear in the world. You have to unlock a color before you can begin collecting. So here we have our final character design. This is a front, side, and rear perspective for Paint Girl. This is not a model yet, this is simply a drawing. And as you can see, she has those cute little pigtails and the little cherry cheeks. But all the texture on the smock, everything like that, we're going to try our best to recreate and include in the game. On to the beta version.
So kind of using that drawing as a base, Kristen went in and made the final character model, which I think looks really good and very true to the concept she came up with. And a big thing with the final character model was having a bunch of different variations of the textures. So as you can see underneath that top row there, there's the blue variation of her texture, and Tristan made different variations for each color in the game. So that added a lot of kind of life to the character as well, which was very nice to see, and it was very satisfying to see from a developer's perspective, all the stuff kind of, building up on each other.
Beta was also where we finally introduced the Greevils. They were not fully operational at this point, but on the right-hand side, you can see our concept art for them. We have a tall Greevil and a short Greevil. They have different attributes slightly, but their main goal is to patrol around the environment and ultimately track down Paint Girl and sap her for color. On the left, you can see a screenshot from our game. That was early times when the Greevils were implemented. They were not fully functional. They kind of just ran up to you and stared at you. But yeah.
Alright, so we're going to show some gameplay of what the beta looked like. So one of the big things with the beta that we added was a tutorial level, which we were kind of on the fence about adding at first. But once we got all those kind of base mechanics in, we were confident enough to kind of start developing a tutorial level. So me and Billy, the level designers on the game, started to make this tutorial level where it's kind of different branches, and in each branch it's a different color mechanic that it focuses on. So in that one room that was just around the corner there, it was red. We're also just showcasing some passive coloring right there as well. But yeah, and then, etc. It goes for each branch. There's a green one, there's a yellow one, etc. So here's the red kind of branch where you have to focus on the red color mechanic. And obviously, as you can tell, she's not just a floating T-pose static mesh, which is great. So I did the run cycle and walk cycle for Pink Girl, and then Kristen, she did the idle and jump animations. And then Christian, he did the paint swing animation. So we all kind of collaborated on the animations there, and it all came together, I think, really nicely. And it was just really satisfying as developers to actually see Paint Girl alive. So yeah, that was really satisfying.
It's definitely the best part of the game when you can see your character move. But at the bottom of the screen there, you can see those symbols. Those represent the colors. Each color has its own symbol, and that symbol is also reflected on Paint Girl's hat, as you can see the red square. We introduced some easels, which act as a tutorial sort of UI pop-up. It tells the player what to do early on. Going back to those symbols at the bottom, we implemented those for people that are colorblind or partially colorblind as a sort of ease of access. Having different color modes wouldn't exactly make sense in a game like this, so we figured this was a next best alternative. If you pay close attention, the active colored assets also have the symbols. You can see that door right there. It has a heart on it that corresponds with the color purple. And she's about to open.
Alright, so now we're moving on to the master version of the game. I will say between the beta and the beta and the master version, it was about a month of development. And I would also say our development exponentially increased in terms of what we were adding as we got closer to our deadlines. So I mean, whether you like it or not, deadlines do help a lot, I think, in terms of being productive. But yeah, so we ended up with this finalized level design here. Once again, me and Billy worked on the level. And so this is level 1, and we went with kind of a city industrial vibe with this level. And we also, again, we were making the biggest main building blocks of this level be the actual buildings, the modular building pieces. So we use that as kind of our base for just making different kind of branches and parts of the level, and then we also were trying to incorporate puzzles as much as we can, and Greevils, sketchbook pages, all these elements coming together to kind of make a cohesive level that all kind of makes sense in the context of the mechanics that the player could use. So in that sense, it was a lot of fun. The biggest thing with getting this master version right was playtesting. I'm not gonna lie, at first I didn't think playtesting would be as important as it was for the level design to be right, but it's super essential because obviously if you're just a level designer, you're gonna know exactly how to get around that level. And you need to see what people who are looking from the outside in are gonna do, because that's the people who are gonna be playing your game. So that's something I definitely learned in this process, but I was very happy with the overall product of this final level we created.
Getting into the master gameplay, this was what we turned in for our class last semester. So we went ahead and skipped the tutorial level since we shut that off a little bit earlier. But this is the beginning of level 1, and as you can see, there are assets, more assets everywhere. Everything's filled out. The UI has become finalized. We've imported more models, finalized models, a bunch of decorative items, and we've also implemented the sketchbook pages, which are our narrative device in the game. You collect them throughout the world, and they give an insight as to the relationship between Pink Girl and her mentor.
Also, again, just the play testing was essential in this part. So we reached out to all kinds of, I know I reached out to a lot of my friends, multiple people in the group reached out to their friends, their siblings, basically anybody we could get, we tried to get to play test the game. And then also, I think it was really good for us to finally see these sketchbook pages coming into play during this part, just because, like Travis said, they're the main story element. We do have that intro cinematic, and that sets up the story really well, but then we wanted to kind of carry that story through the actual gameplay. And then also, the sketchbook pages kind of add this like incentive to actually explore the level. Like there's obviously those color pickups around, but eventually your color gets full and then you don't really, it's not as relevant to pick up those colors anymore, so you need kind of something else to draw the player to certain areas. So having those sketchbook pages fully implemented was actually really satisfying to see in this level. You can see that the green bridge there is being utilized there. But yeah, that's pretty much everything with the master gameplay right there.
Moving on to everything we've started this semester, we have added our level 2 white box. So we've created an entirely second level. It's nearly as large as the first. Matt has implemented a new mechanic, which is a pole vault. It's essentially a higher jump. It is somewhere between the normal jump and the jump pad, the red jump pad. We've also implemented a white paint mechanic, which will help with the new ink walls that the Grievals are constructing. And new environmental models. With the new level comes a new environment. This one is a park as opposed to the industrial area of the first level. So we needed more foliage and natural models. Here is our level 2 fly-through.
So, as you can see with the title there, this is a white box, so this is not a final version of the level 2. But both me and Travis kind of worked together to try to make this level up to par with the standards of the level 1 that we created. So we mainly wanted to kind of base a lot of the movement in this stage around the pole vault mechanic. So as you can see, there's some kind of like, you can see that white barrier up there. That's one of the areas we'd use the pole vault mechanic for. We also wanted to continue those main mechanics through to the level 2. So there's a fountain that you could respawn at. And then we also wanted some good landmarks as well. So we had a more open environment. So we have like a really big tree right there that's very obvious. And we're hoping that that drags the player over there for this white paint, which is very essential to the game.
Yeah, so as I said before, the white paint is a new mechanic, and we should be seeing an ink barrier here soon, but essentially the player has to collect 3 of them. It incentivizes the player to explore the level and to gather this new item in order to continue and to purify the shrine that is to come ahead. So up on that hill there, it's a little difficult to see, but that was the ink barrier right in the middle of the screen.
And yeah, like Travis said, like it was to incentivize again the player's movement. And you know, I said that with the sketchbook, that's what that did. But in reality, we did realize like the sketchbook pages are in the end optional, and so we wanted kind of a literal barrier to make the player more likely to actually explore a specific zone in itself rather than just kind of skip stuff. So this white paint we saw as kind of a solution to that problem. And then we just, also a big thing with this level, we just wanted to iterate more on the variations of how the mechanics play together. So we had this idea of like, over in that corner back there, there's like an orange crate that you have to push across a green bridge, which we had not done in the previous level. So I think it's all about trying to kind of one up yourself, you know, and try to just add new ideas that maybe you didn't think of in the beginning, but they could actually add a lot of variety to the game in the end. We also have this second zone, so that was all the first zone you were seeing. But the second zone here on the left is just kind of the white box version of what would be a playground. And on the right side was like maintenance buildings. And then we have this hedge maze here, which Travis actually worked on a little bit.
So the hedge maze is going to have 3 main areas within it, including, or each one focused on a different color, each of the primary colors, so red, yellow, and blue. And they're going to have different puzzle areas within focusing on those colors. And the main goal is to get through that ink barrier and purify a shrine that's there, which is the win state of the game. So, and there's a complete overview. Moving on to our new models, these were for the second level. In the bottom right there, you have the playground that wasn't quite implemented yet during the fly-through video. In the bottom left, we have the new path models, and in the top middle are some tree models that were soon to be placed in.
And then I made that maze tower at the top left, which is incorporated around the hedge maze area, which is kind of intended for the player to be able to come back. And you know, since the player is passive coloring, our thought was once they're going through a hedge maze, if they get lost, at least they're passive coloring the area they went to, and then they could go back up to this maze tower and kind of use it as like a perspective to see where they have been and where they haven't been in case they're getting stuck. And then I also did those rock variations, those low poly rocks on the right there, which are just incorporated all around the level. Okay, so now I'm going to go over the pole vault mechanic that I added. So this video will kind of showcase each element that went into it. So this is the area where you will unlock the pole vault mechanic. And there it is right there. So tried to make it, you know, flashy, but not too flashy. And I thought it would be cool to kind of have it layer over existing parts of our animation system. So again, this is like one of those barriers that specifically is made for the pole vault mechanic to be used. So there you go, you can actually jump over it with the pole vault. And then we have another barrier right there. And then actually another fun thing that I discovered is you can use it to avoid greevils if you're caught in a bind. Also, the intention with the pole vault mechanic was to use red paint. We did not program that in yet, but that is intended. So here you can see this is the animation I created. And I just made that an animation montage, and then I did a layer blend per bone. And then using that node within there, you can specify which bone that you're blending with. So I specified the spine bone, so it's just the upper body that animation is affecting. And then in the locomotion system, you can see that's just affecting the whole state machine in itself. And then for the particle system, I just took a cascade particle system that we actually created the previous semester. I just basically tweaked some of the parameters within there. And then I put a bunch of emitter components onto the player character blueprint. And those are where the locations are for the particle system to be called. So as you can see there's some for the feet, and then there's a few on the paintbrush as well. And then here is the code, the blueprint code for all of that. It's essentially just using booleans to control when it can or cannot do the pole vault mechanic. That way you can't just spam it up into the air to infinity. Then we have a delay. The delay is actually there so that the pole vault, it doesn't activate, or the launching of the character doesn't activate until the paintbrush actually hits the ground. So I just basically looked in the animation and saw the exact point, whatever seconds it took to get to that. And then I just spawned a bunch of emitters and launched the character, and that's basically the whole piece of code right there. And then I thought it'd be cool to add that particle system also to the jump pads. So that was actually really easy to use since I already had just kind of modified the particle systems, and I added those feet components to spawn those emitters. So that was actually quite easy to do, and I thought it looked cool. Also incorporated that for the yellow jump pad as well. So that was the pole vault mechanic, and everything that went into that. And I also did the white paint models and particle systems. So this was actually pretty basic. I just made a paint kind of model in Maya, imported that into Unreal, and then I used 2 layers of particle systems. I used Niagara. That's kind of my preferred particle system within Unreal. And then I used one kind of like static floating particulates layer, and I also used this layer, which is essentially just a point attraction force. And the thought behind using that was to make this white paint particle stand out to the player more, because it is such an important item to pick up for the player. So the thought was make it very shiny and very interesting to look at, and hopefully they will go for it. And I'm just showing here how if you mess with certain components, it will do certain things to it. So you need that scale mesh size to make sure they don't get enormously large. And yeah, that's pretty much everything that went into the white paint particles. All right, well, that is the end of the presentation. Thank you. And we're gonna go ahead and open up to Q&A. I see a hand raised back there.
I was wondering, someone who is like obsessed with animation, like I am. So what was like the process for like getting animations like for the character? Like, what was the process like figuring out what animation you wanted to do and like how to do it?
That's a good question. Well, oh yeah. So if anybody couldn't hear what he was asking what the process was for getting animations and coming up with them. So my preferred animation program is Maya, and that's what everyone on the team used. And we learned from our program at Peace how to do basic character animations. So that would be a run cycle, a walk cycle, a jump loop, an idle, a jump land. So there's all these kind of different components that we learned in class. So that helped us enormously in just conceptualizing how to do it. And I highly recommend if you are ever confused on how that works, just like go on YouTube and Google like tutorials. Epic has a lot of good tutorials on their channel. And yeah, I know for me, I did the run cycle, walk cycle. So there's good resources on Google Images, for example, of just like how to keyframe cycles. So again, like I would just say Google is your friend if you're ever confused. I know that's an answer for a lot of questions, but yeah, certainly for me that helped a lot.
All right, thank you.
So you in the middle first.
I was wondering how many people you had programming game, and if you have any knowledge on how do they like incorporate or like how do they cooperate with each other when it comes to programming all the
Okay, so the question was how many people we had programming and how they cooperated.
Yeah.
The majority of the programming was actually done by one person, Abby. She is fantastic and was really the workhorse for this. Go Abby. But we did have some people working on getting the animations into the game, and ultimately we did all help out where we could. And it was mostly just Abby telling us that she needed help with something or didn't have time to get to something, and so we would then move on and sort of help her with that. So.
I'll add on to that real quick. So with the sound design, I also didn't realize that the incorporation of sound into a game does actually involve a decent amount of coding depending on what you want to do. So for example, I got Abby's help on doing audio for something as simple as just opening a door for a purple door. And it involved some weird stuff with timelines and that kind of thing. And at first it was very weird to me just in general. But I realized, and through doing other projects this semester as well, I've realized that if you're doing audio, if anyone in here is doing audio, it does take actually more coding than you might expect. So I would say just try to prepare yourself for that if you're ever interested in doing sound design. Anyways.
Yeah, I guess so. The guy just asked. I guess he was asking if you guys use any app for source control, or did you just do it all local? Did you use any stuff like GitHub or Force for source control?
When you say source control, do you mean getting assets online or anything, or?
Yeah, sync all your assets.
Oh yeah, no. So we just use Google Drive. Yeah, we were pretty simple, honestly. Yeah, we would just upload the project file. We would zip that, and then we would send that. We would rename it 11 point whatever, and then that way you would know which is the most updated version. So, but honestly, you saying that makes me think we probably should use GitHub or something. But yeah, but yeah, thank you. That's a good question.
Right, and my question is that do you have your team has any tips for quickly coming out with a level? How do you speed design about it?
Well, with level 1, we didn't know exactly the process we would do. We knew we would do white boxes, so I will say for doing a level right, I would say start with the top-down map. Always draw something out. It can be physical paper, it can be Photoshop, it can be anything, your preferred program or whatever method of choice. But yeah, I would say just start with that, go into white box phase, which is literally just you can use primitive shapes within Unreal, just dragging the white box component and just kind of form your stuff around that. Or the landscape tool is also a good way. On level 2, we used the landscape tool to kind of get the main form of the level, and then we kind of shape stuff around that. And we obviously had the top-down map that we drew out as kind of a reference as well. So I would also say modular modeling is huge. On the level 1, we didn't have to make a separate building for every single part, since we had basically, we try to make it kind of like Legos essentially. That's how I think of modular is, you just have different parts, you have a corner of a building or just the straight side of a building, and then you can link those together and have them snap together. And that made it way quicker for us in the end to make that level. It would have taken us way longer if you had to model each building separately with its respective shapes.
Okay, so basically shipping entire world in the first place and then add those models.
I would say, yeah, for me at least, that definitely seemed to work. Or me and Billy, the other level designer, that definitely worked.
And the beginning of every project is going to be the slowest. So our level 1 took 7 of us an entire semester, and our level 2, it's been just Matt and I, and we've gotten about halfway through what it took 7 of us to get through the semester. So the beginning's always the slowest, and you'll speed up as you get used to it and as you progress through the project.
I have a question. Going about puzzles, I just forgot the question. Oh yeah, going about puzzles, would you recommend, how would you recommend setting up and testing a puzzle? Multiple puzzles, a chain, the objective to get to the next level? So I feel like that's super difficult, like when you're first getting started with the game?
So if anybody couldn't hear that, she was asking kind of like what the process is of how to make a puzzle and how to kind of have it, I guess, fit into the context of a bigger level. And I would say, again, the top-down map of a level that you draw out is where you can figure out a lot of this stuff before you even get into the engine. So, but even then, don't bank on that being your final level design either. Like, always be adaptable. And I would say also, like, we had that prototype level where just like everything's laid out, like all the mechanics are there. And so that allows you to kind of just experiment and see, you know, like what works together, what doesn't. Like, you know, for us, like, we knew that orange crate was going to be a huge puzzle component. So if there's ever like a specific mechanic or something that you know is like going to be like a critical key to the player's experience of puzzles, then I would say try to focus maybe around that, at least to start out. And then as you go, you'll get more familiar kind of with how to use that mechanic and how to maybe have it mesh with other mechanics.
Gotcha. So maybe start out with one thing and then build upon it.
Yeah.
Kind of. Okay.
Yeah, and when it comes to testing, debug tools are very important. In the alpha and beta versions, we had a debug tool where it would give us paint, and that's just something for the developers in order to test functionality and stuff like that. And Unreal also has this feature where you can play from your camera's perspective, from the point of the camera. So if you are testing an entire chain of puzzles, and you want to test like one in the middle specifically, instead of having to run through that entire chain, you can use your debug tools to give yourself the required resources and then play from your camera's point and just do that one specific section that you're targeting.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Any other questions?
So, what you guys have done is, well, what do you do if someone in your team bail out on the front end?
What would we do if someone in our team bailed?
Again, from my school, we would have groups, and some people, and at least one or two people in the group would probably not back again, and you know, just do like 2 or 3 people, and then just throw in the game.
Okay, I get what you're saying. Well, this started as a class project, so I'm sure if someone decided to withdraw from the class, the professor would have helped us, you know, sort of recuperate our losses and restructure our team. But we didn't, luckily. And I'd definitely say if someone did bail, the best thing to do is to talk with the remaining group members and to kind of see if collectively you can fill the gap that was created.
Yeah, I would agree with what Travis said. I think, especially if it's in a class setting, I think go to your professor if you have any, you know, qualms with somebody, you know, bailing out or you know, anything like that. Now, if it's outside of a class setting, I personally haven't really been into that scenario yet, so that I don't have as much of an answer on. But I would say, you know, generally just like maybe ask them questions like why are you bailing out, and then maybe if they have a recommendation of somebody else that could fill in that gap, that could be good. If not, then obviously you have to just figure out as a team how you can fill that gap, like Travis was saying. But yeah, it is an unfortunate scenario, though. I've heard of teams where there's a specific team member that doesn't, you know, pick up their own weight, and that can just affect the whole product in the end. So it's just good to have everybody kind of on the same page at the beginning of, like, we all have this vision, we want to complete this vision collectively, it's not just an individual thing, it's very much communication focused. So.
Well, I guess the better question is like, did anything go wrong when making this game?
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, bugs happen a lot. I mean, in terms of like what your definition of wrong would be, I don't think anything went terribly wrong, but we definitely had, you know, trials and tribulations. I would say for me, the biggest trials and tribulations was just trying to code certain aspects, like I was mentioning the sound design and how that was like kind of an unnecessary nightmare in my opinion at first to like try to figure out how, for example, to get a door sound to be right and be implemented right. So like honestly, it came down to little things like for me with like coding or also just with getting stuff in by a certain time. I mean, deadlines are always, we all know that deadlines can be very hard to deal with. But it's all about, sequentially taking one step at a time and starting as early as you can, getting like a plan and an outline for your whole project and just carrying out that plan, as smoothly as you can. And if there's bumps in the road, that's part of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? Yeah.
Did you guys use any art asset packs or you just follow all minors?
So yeah, at first we did ask our professor if we could do that, and he recommended we did not, just for the experience. And honestly, I'm very glad he said that because it gives you a lot of good portfolio pieces to work with if you actually just make it all from scratch. Obviously, it takes more time, more effort, goes a trade-off, but we just made everything basically from scratch.
Yeah. So did you run into issues where you essentially replacing the white boxes and then suddenly it doesn't work? Did you have some problem or?
Well, yeah, actually, so in terms of the level design and kind of the communication between level design and 3D modeling, with those modular buildings, we actually had an issue with the pivot point
Yes.
not lining up properly, and so that affected all of the modular pieces. Like they were just like this much off by like a hair, but it was just enough that like you could see it. And so that was annoying to deal with as a team, but in the end, we figured it out. The good thing is like pinpointing those kinds of problems and not just kind of like slack them off to the side,
But I mean, you model all your stuff in Maya, right? So you
Yeah.
can essentially set the pivot point like in Maya and then import
Yes.
to Unreal.
Yeah.
Were you aware of this issue after you realized that the pivot point doesn't
Yeah.
match?
Yeah, no, trust me, like, you have to not be afraid to, it's rare that you'll just export from Maya and then it's like, oh, it's all good. Or at least when you're first learning especially. You have to be not afraid to just go back and forth between the programs as much as you might not want to. Like, especially with the pivot points, you have to make sure it's centered on the grid, all zeroed out, freeze transformations, delete history. Like, just always do those things. At least in Maya, that's the kind of course of action I take. But yeah, it can be tough, but again, like I said, like I think the most important thing is if you pinpoint the problem, then just try to tackle it as best you can. Yeah.
I'm curious, I see that your primary audience is 9 to 12-year-olds. Were you able to play test with them? If not, is your plan to do so? And I'm wondering what you learned from that.
So, good question, thank you.
We were able to play test with, I think it was 3 people within our age range. And well, one of them being earlier today, actually, there was an 11-year-old boy at a conference. And they all seemed to find a little bit of difficulty in the beginning. And then as they learned the mechanics of the game, they all became surprisingly good at it. So I definitely think that we want to test with more people within our age range. But things are looking good so far.
So they were able to get up to speed unaided without your help, or is that the area you work?
As far as I remember, they were able to get up to speed on their own. The tutorial level is in-depth enough to where they can understand what they need to do. Any other questions?
So like, you just mentioned to have those colorblind people, so you actually make the shapes that relate to their corresponding colors. But ever think of this, so like, you can blend colors, but you can, you essentially can blend all those shapes. But like, those blending doesn't make sense in your design. Like,
best. So we started off with the primary colors and their shapes, and then we did our best to come up with a good enough mix. None of them are perfect, and it's really hard to do that without creating your own shape. We wanted them easily recognizable and something that's sort of common for people to find. But we were definitely aware of that and the implications that are associated with it.
To add on to that, I think it was a display at my school from the art class, not only the color wheel and emotions that are associated with colors, but it had a wheel of shapes, which I think would exactly serve your purpose. So the primary shapes, so to speak, were I think the square, circle, and triangle, and which I think the triangle was red because it's like pointy or something, square was blue. I can't remember. I'm sure you can look up like the color and shape wheel. I'm sure it is small line, but it was like the heart was a combination of the circle and triangle. And but I think that would be a good thing to do. Also, maybe a bit of a nitpick, but I noticed like the greevils. On the one hand, I really like the greevils. I think that honestly, I love the art. It's adorable and great. And I like that the greevils. They're not evil so much as they seem to be sad themselves, which I think is fitting. And I also like they look a little bit like cats. I don't know if that's just me.
Interesting. Haven't heard that one. But yeah, see that.
Anyway, I found it a bit odd that the greevils come into the world and they're training colors and making everything white, and then you need to fight them with white paint. Thematically, that seems a bit unfocused. Although that's a nitpick. From a game design perspective, it's not an issue,
Yeah.
I guess, but from a story perspective, it's a bit weird.
That sort of ties into the concept of mixing inks, mixing like colored ink and colored paint. When you mix them all together, they become black, just like the greevils. And that's sort of symbolically representing that they have collected all of the color. And then the white is the absence of color, so that theoretically would combat the mix of all colors.
Yeah, I guess. But overall, this is honestly like a professional level game, and you could definitely sell it once you get, I don't know, maybe like 10 levels would be a good thing to shoot. I mean, no, that's a lot, but if you were planning on selling it.
Yeah.
And you could sell it. Like this is, like I said, this looks like very professional.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. And yeah, if it's worth anything, we did originally shoot for like what 8 levels, something like that. So yeah, we definitely had a big scope at first, but then we realized on a small team, especially when everybody's still learning, it's like just focus on what's realistic. So for us, like one level that semester was like what we had to focus on.
Funny how that ambition will get to you.
Oh yeah, no, it's common. It's a common problem. Yeah.
How do you make sure you keep your objectives realistic?
Keep the objectives realistic. What exactly do you mean by realistic?
Like, you said you shot for beats. How do you know what's
Oh.
enough to shoot?
Well, we kind of had to like play it by ear as we went. I would say a lot of it was playing by ear. Obviously, like at first, we had the most ambitious state of mind we did out of the whole semester, and then as we went, it kind of just went down. But we were, like trying to be. We did have a specific list of like nice to have mechanics, and then we need like priority mechanics. So that was one good way of kind of having like a rule of thumb for us of like, is this needed or not for our vision of the game to work? So that was like kind of one method that we figured out how to get realistic objectives.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Adding on to that, how do you do with when you have it started, you've got concepts, how do you scope how long the game is actually going to take from start to end? Just play testing, or how did you guys figure out like how long it would take from start to finish?
Are you talking in terms of time, like gameplay time?
Yes,
Or- okay.
gameplay time.
Yeah, a lot of that is just play testing and getting people who've never played to play it,
Gotcha.
because that's usually what that measurement is new players playing. For us, we can probably speed run the game in like 30 minutes, but your average new player who is exploring the world for the first time can take upwards of like an hour and 15. So,
Thank you.
yeah. And Any other questions? Yes.
It's not so much of a question, so like, I waited until later to bring it up. But sort of going off of what was said about like the shapes and the blending, is I just sort of wanted to clarify some of the thought process the team had behind that, which was, as you said, I believe, having the basic shapes, the square, triangle, and circle be the primary colors, and then have the more complicated shapes be the secondary colors was the first step. And then, so the shapes are more so supposed to be like recognizable with the colors, more so than they are specifically meant to blend between them. But there was a little bit of that incorporated, so like shapes on either side of the blue, like the heart had like more curves to it, so sort of like the circle had curves, and then the star had like a circular shape, you know, it was like symmetrical like the circle was. And then the pointiness sort of came from the yellow of like the triangle. And we did the same thing with like the pentagon, which was sort of the blockier, like sturdier, wider shape like the square would be. And then again, the pointiness of the triangle. So there was a little bit of that there, just sort of in the thought process.
Okay, thanks, Abby.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else? Well, we'd like to thank everybody for coming. If anybody wants to reach out to us, feel free.
Thank you guys.